this way, we can actually move companies closer to an autonomous environment where they can trust what the AI is doing, because the AI has governance that's implied by the data model that it's reading from. But that perpetual state, I think, is what's even more important, right? If you start looking at some of these architectures like UNS, it's a great concept, but without a perpetual state of what has happened, and not just talking about like historians, because those are typically telemetry data, right? Raw sensor data. That doesn't really help me. I need a persistent state of contextualized data. A lot of systems and applications are trying to build their own agents, and they're very deterministic. Like they only work with that application, and they only work and they only understand the data that application has available. There was always this notion of like single source of truth, or single pane of glass, or whatever term you want to use. And everybody thought that like, well, the ERP and the PLM is our single source of truth, but it is only for like a small duration of time. It's a good source of truth for like the first 15 minutes that the data goes into the system. And then immediately when you start, generating real-time data from the shop floor, it's out of date, right? Nothing's in sync anymore.
Welcome back to the AI in Manufacturing podcast here on Industry 4.0 TV. I'm your host, Kudzai Manditereza. And today we're going to discuss how to build a foundation for AI native industrial intelligence. And my guest on this episode is Craig Scott, who's the CEO and founder of Fuuz, an industrial intelligence platform. Craig, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I really, look forward to, diving deep into industrial intelligence with you and sort of like explore also the Fuuz industrial intelligence platform. So as I mentioned, I mean, I found out about you, I think, likely close to a year or so. I don't know when you first appeared on Hawker Reynolds podcast. That's when I found out about you guys and been really following you. So you're really doing some great work. So I really hope that we could, really unpack your philosophy around, what's broken in the industry, what you're doing to solve that, and then we sort of like, talk about how your platform as well. But before we dive into, the conversation today, could you please maybe start by introducing yourself to our audience and giving us a bit of your background and also, a bit about Fuuz as well?
Yeah, sure. I can. I'm happy to give a little bit about my background. So my career started pretty early in manufacturing, around 15 years old. Had my first job I was actually in the construction industry. So that really sparked my interest for how things get made, how things get built. And then even going back further than that, I used to build custom cars with my dad in the garage. So, at the age of 5, I was wrenching on cars and learned how to change oil, so I was always had that mechanical inclination. So I love manufacturing. I love just seeing things come to life. And so from an early age, I wanted to be an engineer so bad. I wanted to be a CAD engineer, and design things on the tube. And I wanted to go work at one of the big 3 because I live in the Detroit area. So, at the time that was like my goal. I knew if I reached that, I have reached the ceiling for everything in my life, and unfortunately I never ended up working at one of the big 3. But what I did was I went to college. I got a degree in manufacturing engineering. And then I got a master's in manufacturing administration. And then I went on to start my own manufacturing companies. So I had a couple different companies that I've owned in the past, one in the tool and die industry here in the automotive area, and another where we did high precision machining, low volume production work. So I dabbled in that, learned all aspects of the business, learned about machines and PLCs and programming, and got a little bit more into the technical end of manufacturing. And then I went to work at an ERP company called Plex for a while. I was a consultant for them for a couple of years. And then after that, I started my own system integration business. So I started integrating Plex with Ignition and Kepware and Boomi and all the different options out there, working with larger companies like American Axle and Tenneco and some of the big tier ones, Magna. And then from there, I saw a need in the industry. I saw kind of this gap. Like, we had really good tools inside the four walls. Ignition was awesome, as a SCADA platform, and connecting machines and visualizing what's happening in real time. And then we had the ERP system in the cloud, and there was a big, move. Everybody wanted to get to the cloud, but there was nothing to fill the gap in between these two things. So we had, real-time streaming data on the plant floor that nobody knew what to do with. Management and executives wanted the visibility, but to get it into the ERP system was a huge lift and a lot of customization. And that's when we started to think about what we could do to help bridge that gap. So, Fuuz is the piece that we're really the shim between the shop floor and the enterprise systems, and providing the contextualization layer, the data foundation for how we map. And if you watch Walker Reynolds, he'll talk about red and blue data all the time, right? So there's a reason why our color is purple, because if you mix red and blue together, it makes purple. So we're the part that's in between, that highly structured enterprise data like ERP and PLM and CRM, and the really unstructured data that's happening on the plant floor. So we bring it all together, and our customers can build applications on the platform that are all, we focus on this model-driven approach, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, because, with AI, that's super critical. And so, yeah, everything that we build is model first. It's definition first rather than end user screen. Now we're collecting data. Now we have to figure out how to get that data into something we can use, right? So it's we kind of we handle the hard parts, I would say. So that's how Fuuz kind of came to be. It was like our secret weapon initially as a system integrator. We were the only ones that had it. So we were able to win a ton of business. When we would go in and help customers do like a digital transformation analysis and what that software journey was going to look like, there's always, people say column fodder, right? You have all these different vendors that you're looking at to do all these, their tools, right? Or their point solutions. And then we would have the last column on the sheet would be, well, we could do all of this with just Fuuz. And from an executive's point of view, right, that's a much lower risk, fewer integrations that are fragile and all that kind of thing. So that got us going. And that's what we've been doing since 2015. So, believe it or not, we've been around about a decade now. And we got customers all over the globe. So, and you're in Munich. So it's cool to be able to talk to people, all over the globe and share and understand what you're seeing on your end of the world too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you've got quite an impressive career there, background in manufacturing, and there's definitely no better person to talk to about manufacturing as far as digital transformation is concerned. Because seems like you've seen it from many different perspectives, right? Running the business itself, integrator, working for a vendor, which is, I think, very good point to start, because for the past couple of years or even a decade, we've kind of been talking about all these things: OT, IT, integration, digital transformation, and somewhat I feel like we've sort of like drifted on what that actually means. There's all kind of like a whole lot of buzzwords that are being thrown around. So I want to take this opportunity to kind of like take a step back and have you describe for us on what you see as being fundamentally broken on the current sort of like data landscape in manufacturing. What is the cost of sort of like having these fragmented solutions or sort of like lost opportunities, particularly as companies sort of like explore deploying AI use cases and things like that?
Yeah, so I think from our perspective, somewhat biased, we really focus on the data piece of manufacturing, and even going back to the earlier days in my career, everything is data driven, right? Manufacturers struggle with the workforce, right? We've got aging workforce that's moving out of the business, whether it's maintenance technicians that know and understand the equipment, that know how to fix them in minutes, versus the newer folks coming in that are having to flip through the manuals. And so that's all data, right? And then even in the front office, we've identified a number of opportunities there, right? We have folks that are really good at estimating. That was one of the first things I learned how to do in my career, was as a process engineer, understanding how to take something that was designed in CAD or on a 2D drawing, and how do you actually manufacture that thing? That takes a lot of skill and knowledge to be able to understand how to build a process to manufacture a product. And those talents are also leaving the business, but it's also very data driven analysis. And I learned very early on that in order for me to be a good estimator, I needed to understand what was happening on the plant floor. So I had to go out, I had to put my industrial engineering hat on. I had to go do my time studies. I had to talk to the operators. I had to understand, what was taking so long to change a die over in a press, right? Or what was, what were the typical like points of failure, so that I could build that into my proposals. And coming at it from two different angles, like you said, from like the business side, but also from the shop floor, like tactical boots on the ground side, really gave me a perspective. And it gives our company a perspective that what we need to do is bring these two data sets together. Because by doing that and putting that into a common infrastructure and a common layer, you take all of that, knowledge that's kind of like leaving the business, and you put it somewhere where it's now accessible. So for the past 10 years, we've been focused on making it accessible just to people like you and I, right? So you can log in and you can see a dashboard, or you could run a report and you can get it in real time. And so I could be an estimator sitting in Munich, but I could be building an estimate for something that'll be manufactured, in South America. I don't have to go visit the plant now, because I can collect the data. I can use Ignition. I can collect the data, the sensory data. I can historize it. I can put it in Fuuz. There I can add my context to it. So what machine was this running on? Who was the operator? What were all the downtime effects, right? And then based on that, you start to build this analysis and this knowledge graph. So, knowledge graphs are been around like forever, honestly, but it's like the new thing, right? Get everything into this knowledge graph, make it available. SESME is working on these, I3X initiative, right, for the standardized APIs using GraphQL. So we're really excited about some of these new standards too, because that really fits in well with our platform. We've been GraphQL based since day one. And you start to put all these things together, you can make all the systems talk. So back to what's the problem? What's the fundamental problem? It's kind of that, right? That's the way we see it. It's the fact that that piece in the middle has been missing for so long. We've had, back in a day when I was an engineer, I would have access to the ERP system, but the data was usually out of date, right? The production rates were not accurate because they were entered in once when the job was launched. And then we've been running this product for 2 years, but the real-time data that we'd been collecting and putting in a historian on the shop floor never got reviewed. It never made its way back to the ERP to get updated. And so you couldn't trust anything, and there was always this notion of like single source of truth, or single pane of glass, or whatever term you want to use. And everybody thought that like, well, the ERP and the PLM is our single source of truth, but it is only for like a small duration of time. It's a good source of truth for like the first 15 minutes that the data goes into the system. And then immediately when you start, generating real-time data from the shop floor, it's out of date, right? Nothing's in sync anymore. And so really, what is a single source of truth these days? If you don't have a shim between the plant floor and the enterprise systems that's making sure that all of this data is flowing and synchronizing in real time, and it's all, relational, right? So that we have the proper context and it's all governed, then you really don't have a single source of truth. moving into like the companies that we talk to that are really forward thinking and want to look at AI, right? And they're starting a lot of these initiatives and spending a lot of time and money, unfortunately, without doing the hard work first. And the hard work is getting the data prepped so that you can make the most use of it with an AI tool. And that's something that, you know, I think we really push companies to think about. You know, we added an MCP capability last year, you know, after working with Walker a little bit, like you mentioned, and realizing that, you know, as a solution, our focus shouldn't be to give people another chat interface, right? There's a million ways you can chat with AI out there. There's free, there's paid, you know, but we're seeing kind of proliferate is a lot of systems and applications are trying to build their own agents, and they're very deterministic. Like they only work with that application, and they only work and they only understand the data that application has available, right? And so we took a different approach as a platform because we don't know what data we're going to have in Fuuz. We have a custom ORM layer. So customers are putting things like raw sensor data in there, but they're also putting PLM and CRM information in our system as well. So we're trying to come up with a way to get all of that data prepped and you know, graphed so that AI can really leverage it and really add some power to what these companies are trying to do. You know, and I think we've seen a lot of missteps in the industry. We've seen a lot of top-down driven initiatives where, you know, we're going to throw Copilot at something and we're going to spin up a data lake and we're just going to pipe everything into this data lake, right? And so you see things like Snowflake and Databricks kind of emerge as these data platforms, and I think that's great. Maybe a little too much of an abstraction from what's really happening, you know, in the manufacturing floor or out in the field, you know, oil fields and all that kind of stuff, right? So, you know, I think that's kind of where we tend to focus with the companies that, you know, we engage with is how do we start data first? How do we organize everything that you have into a semantical structure that, you know, you can first start off with just looking, learning, and understanding as a person. And then we can start to layer on these additional benefits that AI can bring, you know, once you're confident that the data is reliable and consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really interesting that you're sort of like taking that approach of, you know, building this common, you know, data infrastructure as it were, and then exposing it with, you know, things like I3X and MCP. So I'm actually going to be speaking to folks from I3X in a few weeks. So that's interesting
Perfect.
to know that you're definitely going
Yeah.
that direction. Yeah. So I mean, as
we'll
far
be
as
releasing a little I3X, you know, connector here pretty soon. You know, we already support the GraphQL APIs, and anybody, like I could even show you right now how to just go in and build your own GraphQL API. It takes less than 5 minutes. So we'll put all that together and bundle it up. And what's kind of nice is that having that structured interface at a platform level, when you can connect all your other enterprise systems to a single source of truth and then expose all of those through a standard like I3X interface, you've just empowered all of your enterprise systems. You don't have to replace your ERP. You don't have to replace your PLM to gain the benefits of something like I3X. You just need a tool like the Fuuz platform, right, to be able to put all that together and then expose it. And same with the MCP. You know, we see a lot of companies that are just, you know, they're out there looking to like replace all of their solutions that they have, all their systems, because, oh, this one doesn't have any AI support, or this one doesn't have a chatbot in it. You don't have to do that, right? You just need the right tool that enables those capabilities for all of your other systems.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would like to dig, you know, a bit deep into this idea of, you know, having taking this, you know, model-driven approach. So as you may know, right, the pattern that we have seen so far is this approach where sort of like companies, they have got like many point solutions or many sort of like edge connectivity solutions where they do the the data preparation, and then sort of like integrate all of that through some middleware or something like that. And you have been vocal about how that doesn't really solve the underlying problem, instead advocating for a model-driven approach. Could you maybe kind of like break down for why that doesn't work, and sort of like elaborate on what in practice having a model-driven approach means?
Yeah. So I'll clarify, that those tools, like they work, right? We've what we see though is that scale becomes an issue, right? So it becomes relatively straightforward when you buy some of these some of these data modeling tools where we're collecting data at the edge, we're doing some inline contextualization. Everything tends to be very inline, and while the data is in motion, right? So you don't know where it ends up if it stays in the same shape as how you modeled it in this system, right? So I can take some inputs and I can reform that, and I can reshape that, and I can hand it off to some other solution, ERP or whatever. But that ERP is going to reshape it, and so it no longer looks like what I wanted it to look like. So it's not deterministic. It helps me move data from point A to point B, but there's nothing persistent about that data. And so what we do is we not only move the data from point A to point B, but we provide that persistence layer, that data model layer, and it's highly customized to each of our customers. And so I move data from the edge into the standardized model where everything is persisted. Every other system then reads from that model. So I always have a single source of truth that I can go back to. The other approach, it works maybe for one or two sites where you're going to standardize and you're going to pipe everything into, maybe your ERP system, right? Because I've got one ERP, I'm running, 2, 3, 4 different sites off of that. That's okay. The challenge is when you get into a lot of these larger enterprises, they're not running one ERP system. They're oftentimes running 3, 4, maybe more different ERP systems, right? There's regional ERPs depending on what country you're in. They have their specialists. And then they have different MESs. They have different warehouse management systems, right? So you start to pile all of this up. And this means that in order to implement these standardized models in these other solutions, you have to re-implement all of this from one site to the next. And it just becomes, a challenge to roll that out across an enterprise. It's not a once and done. But when you have a persistence model, it is a once and done, right? I define the data model once that everything is going to flow into, and it's done. I can go from one site to the next, and I know that all of those enterprise systems have to share and read and write from that one consistent interface. So that's the approach that we've taken. It is a little bit slower, right? So from day zero, when you choose to go this route, you're going to spend a little bit more time. How much time? Not weeks or months, but we're typically talking about days. In fact, I recently just did another podcast with someone. We were going through how to build an app in Fuuz, a model-driven app in Fuuz using AI. So we used Claude, and in less than a week, I built an entire MES system using Claude and Fuuz. So it built all of the data models for me. And I've seen a lot of the other technology out there. People will spend greater than a week just building one pipeline. So I was pretty impressed with what we could do with that in such a short period of time. But yeah, that's kind of the fundamental difference is what we go after. And the reason why we've partnered with companies like Inductive Automation is to help those solutions scale across the enterprise. Right? I think it's great that we have a lot of solutions that work really well at the edge, and they can be localized, and the plant level engineers can own those solutions, and they can be flexible and extensible for whatever that plant needs. But we need to have a layer right above that where we can bring everything in and kind of govern what's being done.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. And I want to understand from your perspective, how do you, strike that balance, between, because one of the arguments that I've heard from some people in the industry is the idea that now we've got advanced technologies, we've got LLMs and stuff like that. You don't necessarily need to model things up front. You can pretty much just describe it on the edge, put it up there, and then the AI will be able to figure that out and make the connections and things like that. On the other hand, when I speak to manufacturing leaders, some of them, maybe they've been bent by spending 4 years trying to build a common data model for like a data warehouse, and things like that. How do you strike that balance where you're able to define something upfront, but at the same time have the agility to move fast? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I think that's part and parcel to the way that we designed our ORM layer in Fuuz, right? Is being able to build something quickly, but iterate extremely quickly as well. And you bring up a good point that, we've done a lot of work with different AI tools, and I can give it some data. Inevitably you're going to run out of, context space, right? So I have to be pretty careful about how much information I give the model. Or you can go in and you can be more advanced and you could build like a RAG system, right? And you can organize all of that. But at the end of the day, the AI is only as good as the information you give it. It's the same garbage in, garbage out concept that we've always had. And I've noticed, and I'm sure a lot of people have too, that you can ask AI to do a lot of things and it doesn't always give you the right answer, right? It can drift. It can even make things up, right? It can hallucinate. So what we want to do is we want that data model to be deterministic. We want the data model to govern the results that the AI is going to use to interpret and analyze. This way, we can actually move companies closer to an autonomous environment where they can trust what the AI is doing, because the AI has governance that's implied by the data model that it's reading from, right? So when I connect Claude to Fuuz, Claude can't make anything up. It can't imagine an OEE for my line or my machine. It can't, because it's being dictated to Claude. Our data graph is telling it what the OEE is, right? We handle all of those, the math. I don't know if you've played, how terrible AI is at doing math. It's incredible, right? I mean, it can do 1 + 1, but if you feed it a bunch of raw data and say calculate OEE for this machine, I don't know what it's doing. I can't explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually saying this to my wife the other day, that you can ask LLM anything, but just don't ask it to do calculations for you.
Right. It's crazy, right? You think that like the whole concept of these LLMs is like a really complicated, like calculus algorithm in the back end, but it can't do simple mathematics. But that's the thing, is I think a lot of manufacturers are fearful of utilizing AI from like an autonomous standpoint when it gets to like the shop floor, because you just can't trust the output. So you can get to like a hybrid methodology where you're semi-autonomous and you can have AI doing some analysis for you, but a human kind of reviewing and analyzing and having the final word. But if AI doesn't have a choice but to take what it's given and, take the directive from the data-driven objects that we have in the platform, we're getting much, much closer to being able to drive things more autonomously. It can make decisions that we can actually trust in a lot of cases, and it still has a little bit to go, but I really think that's the goal, and depending on who you talk to in the industry, they may tell you that, LLMs are just the tip of the iceberg, right? I mean, they're incredible, but is it the technology that's going to be driving industry a year or 2 years from now? Probably not, right? There's probably going to be some evolution, some new type of model, some new type of tool that's going to take its place from an industrial standpoint. So to build everything around something that's so novel seems like a little bit of a technical debt and a risk, if you ask me. So we want to build tools and platforms that enable the technology, not rely on the new technology to be our platform.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, talking about, de-risking, sort of like this approach, there's some, we're approaching this data modeling from the perspective that it needs to be an industry standard, right? It needs to be something that's already out there, so you can sort of like de-risk your investment. What are your thoughts on whether company, how should they approach, and whether they should adopt a standard or build a custom data model, or what does Fuuz support?
Yeah. So we support both. A lot of our customers will start with one of our accelerators that's largely based around like an ISA 95 data model for manufacturing. Some of them won't, though, because, we work with, we have an automotive OEM right now. We're running the entire factory on Fuuz. So it's hybrid. They're using our gateway on-prem, Fuuz in the cloud. We're doing MES, WMS, maintenance, quality. We're even doing things like vendor portals and supplier EDI and all, e-commerce integrations all through the Fuuz platform. So everything's flowing, through the platform. And the reason I mentioned that one is, there is no common standard data model for what they're trying to accomplish. So even starting with the ISA 95 approach is okay for a small area of the plant that's highly discrete, but we have multiple lines coming together, general assembly, body, paint, drivetrain. You need to be able to extend those data models. So, that ability is key when you have mixed mode manufacturing, and I think that's primarily why you'll find in the industry there's different MES solutions out there, and they're typically vertical focused based on different industries. There's ones that are built for rubbers and plastics, and others for metals and stamping, and that's the problem, is that different processes require different types of modeling. I still look at AI as a tool, and I don't know that we're ready to acknowledge AI as the platform yet. So having it try to make those decisions and make those connections for us and drive those patterns, it just feels like a little too risky. I don't know how many manufacturers agree with that, but ideally we want to get to a point of autonomy where we can change something, whether it's a customer order, a delivery date, or whatever, and have that funnel all the way through to the shop floor. We really don't need AI to do that, but I think a lot of people want it to do that. That's where we get into things like pipelines and flows and making decisions that are very deterministic based on facts that are available to us within, the environment that we have access to. So yeah, it's very interesting to see, kind of where different vendors are kind of taking things, where they're hedging their bets. Being in manufacturing myself and having, owned some manufacturing companies, I don't like to be a betting man. Like I like to bet on safety. I like to make sure that my people are safe on the shop floor, that my data is safe, that, the proper decisions are being made. And, you've been around a lot of factories. There's supervisors for a reason, right? We have line leads and supervisors, and we have all these different, middle management in plants, because we need humans to make these decisions. There are some things that we know computers just are not good at figuring out, right? And sometimes you need that level of interface. So, definitely a hybrid mode makes a lot of sense, I think, to speed things up. We use it here all the time to speed up development of models. And, I say that, like, I can build an entire enterprise data model in Fuuz in like less than an hour. We're not talking like a lot of time. The time is in connecting to all of the data sources that a company has, and then trying to pipe all of the data in and give it the right rules and context, right? That's where all the time gets spent. But it's just, I think it's an unfortunate truth that I think that's what you've got to do if you want to get more value from AI. We can't just do string contains all the time and hope that we're going to get the right, the right information back.
Yeah, absolutely. So, talk to us about, you mentioned this idea of a red and in blue namespace, which I imagine is this idea that you want to be able to give kind of like the local operation, that autonomy, to be able to define and solve their local problems, but at the same time be able to define things at a kind of like global level. So how do you sort of like balance that integrity, where you know what's happening, where you can have that model, and also allow people to be able to do things as they see fit?
Yeah, that's key, right? Is there's always a tension there between IT and OT, between the highly governed models that we have at the enterprise level that management, executives, board of directors rely on for reporting, analysis, and just generally managing the organization. And then the plant level needs that flexibility. They need to be able to pivot. They need to be able to move quickly, and they don't need to have the friction. So what we do is we take the highly governed models and we implement those at the Fuuz data layer, and then we allow the plants as their own individual tenant on the platform. We allow them to extend those models any way that they need to. And by extending the existing models, what you're doing is you're forcing everybody into this paradigm of, essentially, I can add additional metadata or context to a model, but I can't change the underlying model itself, right? So it's like extra information that tags along. So the plant gets the ability to extend and define what they need. Ultimately, that has to align with what the enterprise is looking for out of the data. And that's where you get the benefit. That's where you get the purple namespace, right? Where everything kind of blends together. It's like a melting pot. And then everybody's updated in real time. So, being event driven and not just a data layer, right? Having that, message broker concept where everything is a live streaming event as well. So every system is being updated and has current state and awareness. But that perpetual state, I think, is what's even more important, right? If you start looking at some of these architectures like UNS, it's a great concept, but without a perpetual state of what has happened, and not just talking about like historians, because those are typically telemetry data, right? Raw sensor data. That doesn't really help me. I need a persistent state of contextualized data, and you're not going to get that in pretty much any enterprise system. So people have gone to data lakes, right? They've gone to these other abstraction mechanisms, but that's good for reporting, and it's good for analysis, and it can be used for AI. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't help you run your operations. So there's still that disconnect there where I have everything kind of, denormalized, right? And it's off and it's kind of living there, and I can run reports on this stuff. But if I want to run operations like warehousing, manufacturing lines, I need access to that stuff in real time. So that's kind of where we position the platform, is not a data lake, right? Or a data swamp, but an operational intelligence layer. It's meant to be utilized in real time. We can do it with reporting and analytics as well, but that's sort of like a side effect, right? Of kind of doing it right in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what I was actually just gonna go into right now, to say, for people who are still wondering what sort of like category is Fuuz. How would you define sort of like Fuuz? What does it actually do? What is it? Because it sounds to me like you sort of like bleed into data ops, messaging layer, MES, and kind of like all this functionality. How would you describe what Fuuz is?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because we're a lot of things to a lot of different people. A lot of companies will initially come to us because they're looking for an MES. And that's kind of an easier thing for people to wrap their heads around, because even though there's not one definition of what MES is, people generally understand what the deliverable of an MES system is going to be, right? Downtime, traceability, all of that good stuff. We have other companies come to us because they're looking for warehouse management. So that's kind of, uncommon in the industry that you would see one vendor kind of doing both. And then we have other companies coming to us that aren't looking for layer 3 solutions at all, but their IT teams are actually looking for a platform to build apps. They want to stop extending and customizing their ERP system because A, it's very costly because you have to pay for user licenses. We're an unlimited user model. It slows the ERP systems down. You know, they're not built for a high number of transactions. They're not built for events, right? They're built for transactions. So all of those kinds of limitations they can overcome with the platform. We have an application designer. So that includes, like you said, a data ops. So we have an entire data ops engine. Within the data ops, you can connect to edge devices. You can connect to any enterprise system, ERP, PLM, CRM, et cetera, Snowflake, Google Cloud, Azure, AWS. We have connectors for everything. And those are pre-built connectors, but they're extensible. Customers can make their own connectors. And that same data ops platform is also what we use for building business logic in the system too. So, and I can build autonomous business logic. I just wrote a pipeline last week that generates raw telemetry data for me in Fuuz. So I'm using Fuuz to generate the raw data, and I'm storing it in Fuuz at 40,000 tags a minute or whatever I'm doing right now. And I'm historizing that. And then I have another data ops tool that I'm using to aggregate the data into another table for me by hour, by day. So these are different things that, you know, I could use the data ops tool to structure the data to just move it. So I could say, here's the incoming shape, here's the outgoing shape, and put it over here. But instead, I'm putting it in Fuuz, and I'm making it available to all of my other enterprise systems. So it's a different approach. On top of that, we have our the screen designer. So if you're familiar with tools, you know, like a Tulip, where you can build HMI or a frontline worker application, you can do those things in Fuuz too. It's just a module for us, though. It's not our entire platform, right? It's not our entire existence or being. It's part of what you need to be able to expose the underlying data to the rest of the company. And then, you know, other things like document designers. So people are building, you know, custom documents like packing slips and certificates of analysis and barcode labels. And obviously the data modeler. So I think we're the only platform I've ever seen that allows you to actually design a three-dimensional data model, right, with drag and drop tools. So even if you're not a data scientist, I can teach you how to build an enterprise grade data model pretty quickly. You don't have to even write any code. So, you know, low-no code's a big deal. Everybody's looking for those capabilities. One of the things I'll say that I find really interesting about Fuuz is we've extended that with what we call pro code. So where you typically hit a brick wall with low-no code, we have this additional escape hatch, I call it, where I could go in and write pure JavaScript. I can write my own functions, and I can really go hog wild if I want to. So we've reduced the friction. We've taken the barriers out because we know that's what the plant expects. And we've provided all of this on the infrastructure that gives IT the things that they are expecting, like security, multi-factor authentication, right? Real APIs and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for someone who's listening, this was thinking that it sounds like we're kind of like, you know, moving back to this idea of having one system being everything, right, within the shop floor. I think one of the trends that we have seen in the industry is sort of like companies talking about this idea of having, and I think Hawker also speaks about this, of having sort of like best-in-class tools, one doing whatever it does best, and then kind of like integrating everything into that one common infrastructure. So what would you say to people who are sort of like, you know, thinking to say, if we're going to do everything within the Fuuz platform, sounds like maybe we're going back to this idea of having a monolith that we're trying to run away from. How is that different?
I think there's a couple approaches there. You know, we work with a lot of greenfield operations, right? And, you know, when you're building a new plant, when Slate Automotive wants to build a new car plant and they need to do it in 8 months, you don't have time to go out there and try to acquire best-in-class solutions, right? You don't have time to even go through the vendor analysis for a dozen different solutions to figure out which one is, and what does best-in-class mean? What's best in class for you is different than what it is for me, right? Not everybody is not moving millions of raw data points every minute. Not everybody needs that level of, for an MQTT broker, right? Some people are perfectly fine using open source Mosquito, for example, right?
Yeah.
So best in class, I think, takes a lot of different definitions, just like best practices. Back when I was as an SI and someone would come to me and say, we want to implement ERP and MES, and we just want you to come in. We just want to implement best practices. I said, well, explain to me what best practice means to you, because it's different for one company to another company. And if you throw everything out and, you're going to adapt to one philosophy or another, then I would fear as a manufacturer, you lose your competitive advantage. There are things within the business that make you special as a manufacturer, and you want to retain those things. And by being able to build and define a consistent, holistic operational model in a platform like Fuuz, even for a brownfield, still gives you the ability to add those other best-in-class tools. So if you do need, 2 million streaming data points every minute, then, go get the tool that does that. You can still plug that into the Fuuz ecosystem easily. We're very extensible. So we're not trying to push a monolithic. We know that doesn't really work. We've seen benefits of starting with that single source in greenfield operations due to speed, and we still retain the agility. That gets you up and running quickly. And then where you find there are things that maybe Fuuz doesn't do the way you'd like it done, or you need something better or different, you can go plug in that best-in-class tool. But instead of compiling, these fragile architectures of, 6, 8, 10, 12 different solutions, and even more than that, if you're a global enterprise, right? Because some things just won't work based on where you're located. Now you've got CIOs out there that have 60 to 100 different applications they're managing. They don't want to manage 60 to 100 applications. And that's when the best in class starts to lose its luster, right? So what we give them is an opportunity to maybe eliminate some of the complexity and keep the pieces that are absolutely necessary. So it's not an all or nothing. It's not a if and or else kind of thing. It's really what works best for that particular organization. And really what they're looking to get. I think the first thing that companies need to do before they invest in technology is define the problem that they're trying to solve, right? And if the problem you're trying to solve is getting your arms around your data, then we're a great place to start. And whether that's we need a way to collect the data, i.e. we need MES or WMS or some type of frontline application, we can help you there. Or if you've already got that in place and you love what you have and you just need a way now to get the data somewhere that it becomes useful, then we can also help. So we kind of, it's whatever the manufacturer needs really. And then they can start small and they can grow and do more with it if they choose to.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome stuff. Yeah, it seems like we're quickly, running out of time here. There's still quite a bit to get into, but I think maybe let's, if you could kind of like spend a few minutes here, sort of like digging into your architecture. So I noticed you used MongoDB for the data layer, and also you've got a few technologies. Can you kind of like give us a quick rundown of what your stack looks like and maybe the design decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're primarily a public hosted application. We do offer on-premise deployments as well and private cloud implementations. But our public cloud is where most of our customers exist, and we're a multi-enterprise architecture. It's a Kubernetes backend. We're a Node.js platform framework. We run RabbitMQ for all of our messaging. As you mentioned, MongoDB is really the back end. We've implemented a custom ORM layer, so proprietary layers on top of Rabbit and Mongo to not have to expose the nitty-gritty details to everybody, but give you a nice drag and drop interface. We have a React front end, so React-based application, so it's very web-friendly, HTML5, responsive by design, and that's pretty much the stack in a nutshell, like I said, we do have this multi-enterprise concept. So each customer has their own slice of the pie from a multi-tenancy standpoint. And in each of those enterprises has their own multi-tenancy inside, which is what gives us that additional flexibility. So I can have enterprise A, and enterprise A could have 150 different facilities. Each of those facilities is its own tenant within enterprise A. So they get data segregation and isolation. You eliminate the noisy neighbor issues that you typically get with multi-tenant, solutions. And we've taken the approach that every tenant gets its own database, so that you're not necessarily forced to share a common data model across different sites. So that's where we get that red and blue, right? Enterprise can define, and the plant can extend. And then we also have our gateway. So the Fuuz gateway, if you're running our cloud environment, the gateway installs on-prem, and that's got, dozens of industrial driver protocols like Ethernet IP and Modbus, TCP, MQTT. That'll connect to all your assets within the plant, or you could connect it to like Ignition. If you have an existing SCADA system that you're using, we just connect right to it using a Ignition module or OPC UA. And then that has a built-in store and forward capability. That's all native. You don't have to install databases or manage servers. That'll run in Windows or Linux, and that connects to the cloud. And so you get real-time exchange of data. That gateway also allows our customers to run what we call hybrid. So I can build and design an application in the cloud, but I can actually run it locally through the gateway. So if there's an internet connectivity issue, you can continue to operate for some period of time until that connection comes back up. So a lot of companies are really interested in the green and blue, right? You've got, you're making updates, you want to fail over, you want zero downtime. So we've accomplished that through giving our customers multiple environments. So they get a build, QA, and production environment where they can promote applications or patches or whatever enhancements they might build. And each of the applications is versioned, and the entire software lifecycle is built into our platform. So you don't need a separate code repository. We handle all of the versioning, control, deployments. All of that is handled within the system. If you choose to go that route, we have a ton of integrators that we work with globally, SIs that know how to implement Fuuz. So a huge network of folks that anybody watching could reach out to, to learn more about it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So can you kind of like give us a few examples of where Fuuz is currently deployed?
Yeah, absolutely. We're working with an automotive OEM. So that's one of our bigger deployments. That's a full factory wall-to-wall deployment there. So an entire car plant that's essentially running on two platforms. They have NERP and they have Fuuz. So it's pretty incredible. We have a number of steel mills. There's a company down in Arkansas called Hybar Steel. It's a green steel mill. It's completely solar powered. They have an 800-acre solar farm, and they're running Fuuz there wall to wall. We're doing MES, WMS, layer 2, layer 3, and they have an ERP system. So a lot of connections there. We've got scale houses with RFID tracking. We have a fully continuous production line going there where we're monitoring process, quality, environmental characteristics in real time. And we have a lot of different industries. We've got gun manufacturers that are using Fuuz. We have tier 1, tier 2 automotive suppliers using Fuuz to do things like EDI, CPG companies. A lot of PepsiCo co-packers are utilizing Fuuz. We do the interfacing between Pepsi and the co-packers for real-time data exchange and MES and IoT data collection. So ton of use cases, and we could go on and on and on for days. But literally, when it comes to anything that your ERP doesn't or shouldn't do for your business, you could look at Fuuz to address that. That's kind of the approach that we've taken. Again, we don't have to be everything. We can solve the problems that you want our system to solve, and then you can use best in class for filling in the gaps. Oh
yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly, this idea of an operational data platform or operational data intelligence is something that I think a lot of companies are not used to. Like as you mentioned, a lot of companies are thinking about this idea of just sending all of the data to a data lake, data warehouse, and kind of like getting everything sorted out there. So maybe just to close this session here, do you have thoughts on what manufacturing leaders should be doing now, or how should they prepare for this sort of like next way of thinking about how to generate intelligence, or rather scalable manufacturing intelligence?
Well, yeah, I would say I would go back to define the problem you're trying to solve. Let's make sure that we have that. As a lot of companies we talk to haven't even identified the problem. They'll come and they'll say, hey, we need an MES. And then we start to peel the layers of that onion back. We say, well, why? Well, because we need to know OEE. Well, there's a lot of ways to figure out what your OEE is without putting in an MES system, right? So we really want to make sure that we focus in what is the problem, what are the value drivers behind that problem, and then we can work our way backwards. So we can solve really, really small problems with the industrial intelligence platform, but those really small problems might just expose much bigger problems. And the good news is once you already have the platform in place, it becomes really easy to solve the bigger problems later once they've identified themselves. Just preparing for that is having a good team in place. Make sure you've got a cross-functional team between IT and OT. They won't always agree on everything, but that's okay because they have different perspectives. So what you need is a tool or a vendor or a platform that can fit that gap, right? We understand the two different perspectives, so we know how to make each side of the fence get what they need out of the project. And then, beyond that, it's difficult to give anybody any guidance on how to prepare their data because everybody's in a different state with where their data is at, right? Some is in spreadsheets and some's in SQL tables. But I would just say start taking an inventory of those things and trying to understand which ones hold data that's most valuable to you. You got to treat it like a currency, right? Data is money. And if we can turn that data into actionable insights, now we can make more money for your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Craig, this has been such a fascinating conversation here. Where can people find you? Do you have any last words for audience?
Yeah. Hopefully anybody listening, we'll be at the Prove It conference coming up here in a few weeks. We're just getting ready for that and look forward to meeting anybody. Beyond that, go to our website, fuuz.com, look us up on LinkedIn, or any of the socials. We have a free knowledge base you can go to at support.fuuz.com. And free training too. So if you want to go through our academy and learn more about the platform, free self-paced virtual instruction, we can make that available to anybody. Actually, just go to the website and click on the link and register. So look forward to hearing from folks.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're certainly going to provide links to all the socials and website on the description of this video and podcast. Again, thank you so much, Craig, for taking the time to join me today. It's been such a really, really great conversation. So really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.